For 500 years, Rome ruled the known world. Its legions were unbeatable. Its roads connected 3 continents, and its emperors believed the empire would last forever. Then, one day, barbarian warriors walked directly through the gates of Rome itself, and nobody, not the army, not the Senate, not the emperor, could stop them. This is the story of how the greatest empire in history collapsed. Before we continue, if you're enjoying these deep dives into ancient history, please follow our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It genuinely helps us keep bringing you these stories, and we'd love to have you as part of this journey. Now, let's step back into the 2nd century, into Rome, at the absolute height of its power. At its greatest extent, the Roman Empire stretched from the misty hills of Britain in the north to the deserts of Egypt in the south, from Spain in the west to the borders of Persia in the east, controlling roughly 70 million people, a genuinely staggering portion of the entire ancient world's population. This empire had been built and maintained through centuries of genuinely disciplined military conquest, sophisticated engineering, and remarkably efficient administration, creating a level of stability, trade, and infrastructure that would not be matched again in Europe for well over 1,000 years. Yet even at this genuine peak of power, subtle cracks were already beginning to form beneath Rome's seemingly unshakable surface, problems that would take centuries to fully develop, but which historians now recognize as the earliest seeds of the empire's eventual, genuinely catastrophic collapse. One of the earliest and most genuinely persistent problems was political instability at the very top. Roman emperors were frequently assassinated, overthrown, or forced into power through military coups rather than any orderly, predictable system of succession, creating chronic uncertainty at the empire's highest levels. During the 3rd century, this instability reached genuinely crisis levels. In just 50 years, Rome saw over 20 different emperors take power, most of them dying violently, while the empire simultaneously faced devastating plagues, economic collapse, and constant invasions along its borders. Emperor Diocletian eventually managed to stabilize this chaos in the late 3rd century through genuinely significant reforms, but one of his most consequential decisions was splitting the empire into 2 administrative halves, an eastern portion and a western portion, each governed separately. This division, though initially intended purely as a practical administrative solution for governing such a genuinely enormous territory, would eventually prove to be one of the most significant factors in the empire's later collapse, as the eastern and western halves gradually developed increasingly separate identities and priorities. Meanwhile, beyond Rome's northern and eastern borders, genuinely significant demographic pressures were building among various Germanic tribes, including the Goths, Vandals, and numerous other groups, who found themselves increasingly squeezed by their own internal conflicts and external pressures. The genuinely decisive trigger for much of this pressure came from an unexpected direction entirely. The Huns, a fierce nomadic people originating from the Central Asian steppes, who began pushing westward with devastating military force during the 4th century. As the Huns advanced, they displaced and terrorized various Germanic tribes living in their path, creating a genuine cascading effect where entire populations, desperate to escape Hunnic conquest, began fleeing westward, directly toward the borders of the Roman Empire itself. In 376 CE, a genuinely massive group of Gothic refugees, fleeing Hunnic pressure, arrived at the Danube River, Rome's northern frontier, and requested permission to cross into Roman territory, seeking safety from the advancing Huns behind them. Roman authorities, seeing a genuine opportunity to gain additional military manpower and agricultural labor, agreed to allow these Gothic refugees to settle within imperial territory. However, corrupt Roman officials proceeded to exploit and mistreat these desperate refugees terribly, provoking their genuine, understandable rage. This mistreatment eventually triggered open rebellion, and in 378 CE, Gothic forces decisively defeated the Roman army at the Battle of Adrianople, a genuinely catastrophic military disaster that killed the Eastern Roman Emperor Valens himself and destroyed a significant portion of Rome's professional military forces. This genuinely shocking defeat demonstrated, for the first time in centuries, that Rome's legendary military could actually be decisively defeated by what Romans had traditionally dismissed as disorganized barbarian forces, shattering a psychological confidence that had underpinned Roman power for generations. Throughout the following decades, the western half of the empire in particular faced increasingly severe economic difficulties, with declining tax revenues, disrupted trade routes, and genuinely mounting costs required to maintain military defenses along its extensive, increasingly threatened borders. The Western Roman economy, always somewhat less developed than the wealthier eastern provinces surrounding Constantinople, genuinely struggled to sustain the enormous costs required for continued military expansion and border defense against these mounting external pressures. By the early 5th century, Rome's western provinces faced genuinely relentless waves of Germanic invasion and settlement. In 406 CE, a massive combined force of Vandals, Alans, and Suebi crossed the frozen Rhine River, overwhelming Roman defenses and pouring into Gaul. This invasion proved genuinely impossible for the increasingly weakened Western Roman military to effectively repel, and these invading groups gradually established their own independent kingdoms throughout former Roman territory in Gaul, Spain, and eventually North Africa itself. Then, in 410 CE, an event occurred that genuinely shocked the entire ancient world. The Visigothic king Alaric led his forces directly into Rome itself, the Eternal City, which had not been successfully captured by a foreign enemy in over 800 years. The sack of Rome by Alaric's forces lasted 3 genuinely devastating days, during which Gothic soldiers looted the city's treasures, though notably showed considerable restraint compared to later invasions, largely sparing churches and avoiding indiscriminate massacre of the civilian population. Despite this relative restraint, the psychological impact throughout the Roman world proved genuinely catastrophic. Saint Jerome, writing from distant Bethlehem, reportedly wept upon hearing the news, declaring that the city which had conquered the entire world had itself now been conquered. Throughout the following decades, the Western Empire continued fragmenting at an increasingly alarming pace. Britain was formally abandoned by Roman authorities in 410 CE, left to fend for itself against increasing Saxon incursions without any further imperial military support. In 451 CE, the Western Empire faced perhaps its most genuinely existential threat yet, when Attila the Hun, having consolidated an enormous nomadic empire, led his forces directly into Roman Gaul, threatening to overrun what remained of Western Roman territory entirely. At the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains, a genuinely desperate combined force of Romans and their Gothic allies, united temporarily against this shared Hunnic threat, managed to fight Attila's forces to a costly standstill, preventing complete Roman collapse, at least for the moment. This temporary reprieve, however, could not genuinely reverse the Western Empire's overall accelerating decline. Roman central authority continued weakening dramatically throughout the following decades, with actual emperors increasingly becoming puppets controlled by powerful Germanic military commanders serving within Roman armies. By the mid to late 5th century, the Western Roman Empire had effectively become a shadow of its former self, controlling only a genuinely fraction of its once vast territory, with real military and political power increasingly held by Germanic warlords operating nominally under Roman authority. The genuinely final blow came in 476 CE, when a Germanic military commander named Odoacer, serving within the Roman army itself, deposed the last Western Roman emperor, a young boy genuinely named Romulus Augustulus, and declared himself ruler of Italy instead. This event, seemingly relatively minor at the time compared to earlier, more dramatic invasions and sackings, has traditionally been marked by historians as the genuine, definitive end of the Western Roman Empire, closing a chapter of history that had spanned over 500 years. Importantly, while the Western Empire collapsed entirely, the eastern half, centered around the wealthy city of Constantinople, genuinely survived and continued flourishing for nearly another 1,000 years, eventually becoming what historians now call the Byzantine Empire. Historians today generally agree that Rome's collapse resulted from no single cause, but rather a genuinely complex combination of factors accumulating over centuries: political instability, economic decline, military overextension, and genuinely relentless external pressure from migrating peoples fleeing their own crises. Some historians also point to internal cultural and social changes, declining civic participation, growing reliance on foreign mercenary soldiers rather than genuinely committed citizen armies, and increasing wealth inequality that gradually eroded the empire's internal cohesion and resilience over time. The genuine legacy of Rome's fall, however, extends far beyond simple military and political collapse. Roman law, language, architecture, and administrative traditions genuinely survived and profoundly shaped the development of medieval and modern European civilization for centuries afterward. Today, the ruins of Rome still stand as genuinely powerful physical reminders of this remarkable rise and fall. Ancient monuments that continue teaching each new generation that even the most seemingly permanent, unshakable empires can genuinely, eventually collapse under sustained pressure. Thanks so much for watching. If this incredible story of rise, decline, and ultimate collapse surprised you, please leave a comment below, follow our Facebook page, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more untold stories from ancient history. Until next time, take care.